October 1942. The Sixth Army was bleeding itself dry in the ruins of Stalingrad. The advance had slowed to such a crawl that Army headquarters, and even the General Staff in Berlin, were being briefed on victories measured by a single blockhouse or one factory hall. Though 90% of the city lay in German hands, the Soviets still poured men and supplies across the Volga. Desperate to finish the fight, General der Panzertruppe Friedrich Paulus, commander of the Sixth Army, gambled everything on his Sturm Pioneers for one last push in Operation Hubertus. How can one even begin to describe the vicious, humanity-defying fighting that took place in Stalingrad? The Germans called it Rattenkrieg, War of the Rats. Street by street, basement to basement, sewers to rooftops, Germans and Soviets slaughtered each other in a struggle without mercy. By November, the Sixth Army had pushed the Red Army into a few last strongholds, barely 10% of the city. Yet German divisions were bleeding dry, companies reduced to fewer than 50 men. To fill the ranks, the Sixth Army cut signal battalions, reassigned clerks, even pressed Turkic collaborators into combat roles. Paulus had no initiative in breaking the stalemate other than throwing more bodies. So Kurt Zeitzler, chief of the Army General Staff in Berlin, the Oberkommando des Heers, stepped in with his own proposal. German pioneers had already distinguished themselves with their mastery of explosives, breaking through Soviet positions by blasting new points of entry and adapting quickly to brutal house-to-house combat. Zeitzler proposed concentrating them into a massed Sturm Pioneer force for a final, all-out push to take the city. When the plan was presented to Hitler, he saw clear parallels with the stormtroopers of World War I, who had once broken the deadlock of trench warfare. The Fuhrer was impressed and became personally involved in the operation's tactical planning. Soon, some 2,000 pioneers, many of them airlifted into the city, were concentrated under the command of Oberst Josef Linden, a veteran engineering officer. Linden planned to split his force in two. First, a powerful thrust from the north, followed by a strike from the south once Soviet defenses were fully engaged. The attack would open with a 2-hour artillery barrage and supported closely by the Luftwaffe. But even before the operation began, Linden's supporting infantry were already buckling under Soviet pressure. One key unit, the 79th Infanterie Division, was hammered relentlessly by artillery, airstrikes, and more than 20 infantry assaults in the days leading up to the attack. Seeing his infantry support weakening even before the operation, Linden appealed again and again to 6th Army headquarters for reinforcements. None could be spared. On November 11, 1942, Operation Hubertus began, after a 2-hour duel between German and Soviet artillery. Pioneer assault companies, backed by infantry Kampfgruppen, struck forward with surprising success. By nightfall, one supporting unit even flanked across all Soviet resistance and reached the banks of the Volga. At the chemical factory, a critical day one objective, pioneers were met with stubborn resistance. Soviet snipers pinned them down until a 5-man flamethrower team rushed the ruins. The Russians had barricaded themselves inside, forcing one pioneer to sprint back under fire for satchel charges. With explosives, they blasted open a breach, and the flamethrower team advanced room by room, floor by floor, unleashing fire on the defenders trapped within. This impression depicts a pioneer of the 305th Pionier-Bataillon, tasked with the assault on the chemical factory. He is armed with the Flammenwerfer 41, a hydrogen torch that ignited a tar and petrol mixture propelled by pressurized nitrogen. The fuel was thick and sticky, clinging to everything it touched, and giving the weapon greater range and terrifying effectiveness. The soldier wears an M42 mid-war German Stahlhelm, fitted with motorcycle-style goggles and a bandana to shield him from smoke and the blowback of his flamethrower. His uniform is the M36 style tunic with bottle green collar tabs, with black pioneer piping lining his shoulder blades.
This early war design remained in production throughout the conflict, and his set is a mid-war issue, distinguished by trousers that matched the tunic's reed green rather than the stone gray of earlier production. On his chest, he bears the Infantry Assault Badge, awarded to soldiers who fought in 3 separate days of frontline combat. Normally, pioneers received the General Assault Badge, as their duties were considered combat support rather than direct infantry action. But in Stalingrad, pioneers were thrown directly into the line, and for that, recognized with the Infantry Assault Badge instead. Many veterans of the city deliberately broke theirs, a gesture that transformed the award from a routine decoration into a scarred testament of survival in one of the most brutal battles of the war. On his tunic button, he has clipped a small flashlight, useful for both night fighting and navigating smoke-filled buildings. Around his waist is a Walther P-38 sidearm and a bayonet. Tucked into his belt is also his M39 field cap, trimmed with black piping that identifies him as a pioneer. Prepared for constant combat, he ditched his mess kit and instead carries 2 water canteens. The Flammenwerfer 41 could only sustain about 10 seconds of firing, despite its portrayal in popular media, and there was no way to recharge it in the front lines. Once empty, the operator was expected to discard the weapon and fight on with whatever arms were available to keep up the momentum of the assault. Elsewhere on the front, German forces struggled to break through Soviet-occupied buildings, where all the ground floors were fortified with thick walls. The pioneers had to pull back and regroup, returning the next day with ladders. Even then, they only managed to breach the fortifications at a heavy cost. Linden's pioneers suffered so many casualties on the second day that infantry support units had to take over the assault in several sectors. Meanwhile, Soviet resistance along the front was growing stronger. General Vasily Chikov, commander of the Soviet 62nd Army holding Stalingrad, was throwing everything he had at the Germans. His northern defensive positions had already crumbled, and the once cohesive defense along the Volga had shattered. By the third day, the front line had pushed all the way to the Volga banks. The pioneers had advanced so quickly that their supporting infantry were now bogged down by Soviet stragglers. Though the replacement infantry fought bravely, they lacked the experience needed to keep up with Linden's assault units. As a result, many pioneers found themselves cut off behind enemy lines. The pressure on the infantry was immense. General Major Oppenländer of the 305th Infantry Division was so overwhelmed by the losses, 30% of his men in just 3 days, that he resigned from command. Meanwhile, our pioneer has ditched his flamethrower in favor of a Soviet PPSH submachine gun, and now carries a satchel filled with stick grenades. A foldable entrenchment tool, now tucked in his back, serves as a shovel, pick, or even a makeshift melee weapon. Linden's pioneers are now deep inside Soviet territory, right on top of General Chikov's headquarters, clashing with the staff of the Soviet 62nd Army. But they're exhausted from days of relentless fighting. Linden's southern forces, meanwhile, managed to bypass the weakening Soviet resistance, setting up anti-tank guns, aimed at ships and rafts, ferrying Red Army reinforcements across the Volga. The Soviet 62nd Army has been cut off, but the pioneers can't break through the defenses surrounding Red Army HQ, and German infantry units are bogged down by remnants of 8 shattered Soviet divisions standing between them and the storm pioneers. The ground gained in this offensive would become the 6th Army's grave. On November 19, 1942, time ran out. With brutal precision, the Red Army launched Operation Uranus, smashing through the flanks of the 6th Army and trapping it in Stalingrad. Kurt Seitzler, Chief of Staff of the German Army High Command, would go on to endure a string of defeats. Disillusioned and broken by the crushing reality of the Eastern Front, he suffered a nervous breakdown and was dismissed in 1944. Paulus, ever cautious and lacking initiative, missed his final chance to lead a breakout. Surrounded, starving, and under constant bombardment, he surrendered to the Red Army on January 31st, 1943. Major Josef Linden, still at the head of his worn-down pioneers, spent his final days keeping supply routes open, clearing snow from airstrips, and ensuring the evacuation of the wounded. On January 30th, 1943, he was captured at his command post by advancing Soviet troops. His assault pioneers were among the last to surrender in Stalingrad, holding their positions with grim determination until February 2nd, with only 35 combat-effective men left standing. I hope you enjoyed this rather long-form video on Operation Hubertus and the pioneers who carried out the final push of the 6th Army. Please leave a like and subscribe to my channel. Stalingrad was a brutal, drawn-out battle, and I'm looking forward to dedicating a few more videos to cover its various phases. Your support goes a long way in keeping these videos coming. Thank you again for sharing my passion for history and model making. This is the War Room, signing off.